On the field, Barry Sanders made the impossible look easy, but off the field, he's now dealing with a fight he never expected. At just 56 years old, Sanders came dangerously close to losing it all when a sudden heart attack hit without warning. One moment it was a normal day, the next it was a battle for his life. Now fans are hearing the eye-opening details, the warning signs he brushed aside, the lifestyle changes he's been forced to make, and the harsh reminder that even legends aren't untouchable. But before we get into all that, let's take it back to where it all started. Barry David Sanders was born on July 16, 1968, in Wichita, Kansas. From the start, he learned the meaning of hard work by following his father, a roofer and carpenter, to job sites. The Sanders family was built on sweat, discipline, and a no-complaints attitude, lessons that would shape Barry long before football ever did. At Wichita North High School, he joined the football team as a tailback and earned a starting role his sophomore year. But by the next season, he lost the spot to his older brother Byron, a standout player who later earned a scholarship to Northwestern University. Things took another turn when coaches decided Barry was too small and shifted him to the wingback position, where he was expected to block and catch short passes instead of carrying the ball. One coach even whispered doubts to his replacement, planting the idea that Barry wasn't tough enough to play running back. But Barry proved otherwise. In his very first game at wingback, he scored 4 touchdowns. A couple of weeks later, fate handed him an opening at running back after the starter angered the coach. On his first carry, Barry exploded for a 40-yard touchdown, silencing all doubt. By the 4th game, he was the starting running back, and the numbers spoke for themselves. 274 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in a single night. Over the final 7 games of that season, he piled up 1,417 yards, dazzling crowds with zigzag runs that left defenders chasing shadows. By year's end, he was named All-State and earned honorable mention All-American honors. Despite that success, major programs like Oklahoma and Nebraska overlooked him, dismissing his small frame. His scholarship offers came instead from Emporia State, Iowa State, Tulsa, and Oklahoma State. The Cowboys only discovered him thanks to defensive line assistant George Wallstad, who had once coached in Wichita. Initially, Wallstad visited to scout a lineman named Joel Fry, but when he got his hands on Barry's highlight tape, everything changed. To Wallstad, the young back moved like Joe Washington, and he guarded that tape like treasure, refusing to let rival programs see it. That secrecy paid off. Oklahoma and Nebraska missed out, never realizing the kind of talent hiding in Wichita. Even when Barry's high school coach tried to show the tape at a Nebraska clinic, their staff had no clue who he was until it was too late. By then, Iowa State and Tulsa were his only serious suitors, until Oklahoma State swooped in and pulled off what would later be remembered as one of the greatest recruiting steals in school history. When Barry committed to Oklahoma State, even his father thought he had made a mistake, but history would prove him wrong. Mike Gundy's first look at Barry Sanders left a mark that never faded. Sanders wasn't a big-name recruit, but one scrimmage was enough for Gundy to realize he was seeing something different. He walked off the field that day, telling his girlfriend's father, a sports fanatic, that the kid they had just watched would one day win the Heisman. Gundy had never seen anyone move like that, slipping through defenders as if they were barely there. At the time, Gundy himself was the star of Oklahoma State's 1986 signing class, but he quickly understood Sanders was a talent in a league of his own. The Cowboys were stacked that year. Alongside Sanders was Thurman Thomas, a polished runner who would go on to NFL stardom with the Buffalo Bills. With Thomas in his junior season, Sanders was limited as a freshman, finishing with modest numbers but showing flashes of electricity. He also made noise as a kick returner, averaging nearly 24 yards a return. By 1987, Thomas was still the lead back, but Sanders couldn't be ignored anymore. The turning point came in October, when Oklahoma State faced Nebraska in a top 10 matchup. Thomas, the nation's rushing leader, was completely shut down by the Cornhuskers' defense. But when Sanders entered late in the game, he broke loose for 60 yards, leaving Nebraska players stunned. All-American defensive end Neil Smith later admitted they couldn't tackle him. Even Barry Switzer, preparing for Bedlam that year, told his staff to pray Thomas didn't get hurt because the backup was even scarier. Sanders' sophomore season ended with 603 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns, but everyone could see what was coming. When Thomas left for the NFL after that year, the spotlight shifted to Sanders. Heading into 1988, the Heisman race was expected to be between UCLA's Troy Aikman and USC's Rodney Peete. Sanders wasn't even on the radar. USC's quarterback remembered all the preseason hype being about him and Aikman, saying nobody really knew who Barry was. That didn't stop Oklahoma State's sports information director, Steve Buzzard, from trying to change the narrative. He recognized Sanders' brilliance early and worked tirelessly to promote him. The challenge was twofold. The Cowboys weren't on national television much, and Sanders had no interest in campaigning. While Buzzard mailed out information packets and called Heisman voters, Barry was more likely to be found in the library than in front of a camera. Even when national reporters flew in, staff members often had to track him down around campus just to get him to an interview. Once the '88 season began, Sanders wasted no time announcing himself to the country. On the very first play of his first start, he returned a kickoff for a touchdown. A week later, he shredded Texas A&M's defense for 157 yards and a score, with the Aggies later realizing that was one of his lowest outputs all season. Against Tulsa, he ran for 304 yards, breaking school records. Then came the famous leap when he hurdled a defender mid-play, a moment immortalized by Sports Illustrated. Even in games where the Cowboys were outmatched, Sanders stood out. Against Nebraska in 1988, OSU trailed 42-0 in the first half, but Sanders refused to quit. He racked up 189 yards and 4 touchdowns against one of the toughest defenses in the country, forcing Nebraska to respect him in a way they never had Thomas the year before. Later that season, he delivered his signature Heisman moment against Oklahoma, juking a defender out of his shoes for a 67-yard touchdown on national television. By the time the season wrapped, Sanders had put together one of the most dominant years in college football history. He averaged nearly 239 yards per game, piled up 2,628 rushing yards, and scored 37 touchdowns. He recorded 5 straight 200-yard games, at least 2 touchdowns in every game, and still contributed on special teams. Looking back, teammates and coaches will tell you they knew they were watching something you just don't see twice. Mike Gundy, the guy handing Sanders the ball every Saturday, compared the debate over college football's greatest player to the endless Jordan versus LeBron argument. Only in this case, he said, there was no debate. Nobody came close to Barry Sanders. Yet even while Sanders was putting up video game numbers in 1988, the Heisman buzz kept drifting to LA, centered on Troy Aikman at UCLA and Rodney Peete at USC. But when the votes came in, the hype didn't matter. Sanders was the runaway winner. Then a month later, Sanders delivered one more masterpiece. Against Texas Tech, he ran for 332 yards, breaking Marcus Allen's NCAA single-season rushing record and sealing what many call the greatest season in college football history. A few weeks later, in the Holiday Bowl against Wyoming, he added another 222 yards and 5 touchdowns in a 62-14 rout. When the dust settled and the stats were in, his season almost didn't look real. 2,850 rushing yards, 44 total touchdowns, and an unbelievable 34 NCAA records broken. The accolades came pouring in too. Sanders was named a unanimous All-American, took home Big 8 Offensive Player of the Year, and added both the Maxwell and Walter Camp Awards to his trophy case. Now, before 1990, the NFL had a strict rule. No college players could enter the draft until they finished their senior year. Barry Sanders originally planned to return to Oklahoma State for that final season, but circumstances shifted. The NCAA hit the school with heavy sanctions after a major investigation, including bans on bowl games and nationally televised matchups. Because of that, NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle granted Sanders special permission to declare for the draft a year early. That decision sent ripples through the 1989 draft. The Dallas Cowboys locked in Troy Aikman with the first overall pick, while the Green Bay Packers went with highly touted tackle Tony Mandarich at number 2. The Detroit Lions, who had been eyeing Deion Sanders, suddenly had another Sanders on their radar. With the 3rd pick, they chose Barry. Sanders was never one to seek the spotlight. Fame embarrassed him more than it excited him, and he often slipped away when the cameras turned his way. After being drafted between Aikman at 1 and Deion Sanders at 5, he even avoided ESPN appearances, later explaining that he simply didn't see the need for all the attention. Detroit head coach Wayne Fontes gave him the number 20 jersey, honoring Lions legends Lem Barney and Billy Sims. Sanders accepted it with pride, but his start with the team wasn't completely smooth. He held out of training camp while negotiating one of the largest rookie deals at the time, a 5-year, $9.5 million contract with a $2.1 million signing bonus. Missing camp meant he didn't start the first 2 games of the season, but by week 3, he was already showing flashes of greatness with his first 100-yard rushing game against the Chicago Bears. Despite a couple of injuries that sidelined him briefly, Sanders finished his rookie year with 1,470 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns, plus 282 receiving yards. His performance set a Lions single-season rushing record and put him in a head-to-head race with Kansas City's Christian Okoye for the NFL rushing title. Late in the final game of the season, Sanders was only 10 yards away from securing the crown. With Detroit comfortably leading Atlanta, Coach Fontes asked if he wanted to go back in. Sanders refused, choosing instead to let his teammates get playing time. That selfless decision cost him the rushing title, but it added to his legend. He still earned NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year honors, his first Pro Bowl selection, and the first of 6 first-team All-Pro nods. For Detroit, Sanders brought back memories of their glory days in the 1950s, when the team was a powerhouse with 3 NFL championships between 1952 and 1954-1957. But in the decades since, success had been rare. Even with Sanders, the Lions struggled through his first 2 seasons, finishing 7-9 in 1989 and 6-10 in 1989-1990. Still, his individual brilliance shined. In 1990, he led the entire league in rushing with 1,304 yards and 13 touchdowns, becoming the first Lion since Byron White in 1940 to win a rushing title. By 1991, the Lions had built a stronger roster around him, and everything finally clicked. Sanders rushed for 1,548 yards and a career-high 16 touchdowns as Detroit posted a 12-4 record. That season, the Lions broke their long playoff drought, crushing the Dallas Cowboys 38-6 for their first postseason win since 1962. The offense thrived with quarterback Eric Kramer and a talented receiving corps, featuring Brett Perriman, Willie Green, and rookie Herman Moore. On defense, Chris Spielman, Benny Blades, and Ray Crockett led the charge. But the celebration didn't last long. Just a week later, Washington slammed the brakes on Detroit's run with a brutal 41-10 beatdown. Over the next 4 years, the Lions made it back to the playoffs 3 times, but every trip ended the same. Gone after the first round. They lost to the Packers in 93 and 94, then the Eagles in 95. During that stretch, Detroit shuffled through quarterbacks like Eric Kramer, Andre Ware, Rodney Peete, Dave Krieg, and Scott Mitchell. Still, their receiving corps was rock solid. Herman Moore, Brett Perriman, Aubrey Matthews, and Johnny Morton. And holding it all together was Barry Sanders, who kept cranking out historic numbers. 1,352 yards and 9 touchdowns in 92, 1,115 yards in 93, a league best 1,883 yards in 94-94, and another 1,500 yards with 11 scores in 95. The following year, however, Detroit stumbled to a 5-11 record. That collapse led to head coach Wayne Fontes being fired and Bobby Ross, fresh off his run with the San Diego Chargers, taking over in 1997. Sanders wasted no time reestablishing himself as the heart of the offense, leading the league in rushing with 1,553 yards and 11 touchdowns. The Lions clawed back to a 9-7 finish, but once again, their postseason ended in the wild-card round. Sanders' 1997 campaign, though, was unlike anything the NFL had ever seen. Week after week, he tore through defenses with one 100-yard game after another. By season's end, he became just the 3rd running back in history to top 2,000 yards in a single season, finishing with 2,053 yards, 11 touchdowns, and a league-best 128.3 rushing yards per game. It was no surprise that he was named both NFL MVP and Offensive Player of the Year. Players across the league marveled at his style. At just 5 feet 8 inches and 200 pounds, Sanders was small by NFL standards, but his quickness and balance made him almost untouchable. Defenders often compared him to a sports car, able to stop, cut, and accelerate in ways that made even the most determined tacklers miss. In 1998, Sanders extended his streak of 1,000-yard seasons to 10 straight, finishing with 1,491 yards. Yet despite his brilliance, Detroit once again slumped to 5-11. What came next stunned the sports world. Following the season, Sanders quietly began hinting at retirement. Some of his teammates noticed his frustration after a disappointing finale against Baltimore, when he fell just short of another 1,500-yard season. Defensive end Robert Porcher later recalled how linebacker Tracy Scroggins urged him to check on Sanders, who had mentioned the possibility of walking away. Porcher brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just post-game frustration. Months later, after missing every off-season team activity, Sanders bumped into Porcher by chance in downtown Rochester. Their conversation was short, and Sanders admitted he still wasn't sure about his future. Porcher offered his support, telling him the team would stand behind whatever he decided. It turned out to be the last time they spoke about retirement. Then came the summer of 1999. Just before training camp, Sanders stunned the Lions and the entire NFL. In a move that seemed almost unthinkable, he announced his retirement by faxing a statement to his hometown newspaper, the Wichita Eagle. The message was simple: he no longer had the desire to keep playing. His agents confirmed the news to the Lions front office late one night, forcing the team to scramble and prepare for life without their franchise player. The timing left fans and experts in disbelief. Sanders was still at the peak of his career and sat only 1,457 yards shy of breaking Walter Payton's all-time rushing record. For most players, chasing down history would have been the ultimate motivation. For Sanders, it wasn't. He later explained that he never valued the record enough to let it overshadow his dignity or Payton's legacy. His heart simply wasn't in the game anymore. Sanders pointed to years of frustration with Detroit's constant rebuilding and organizational chaos as another reason behind his decision. Ultimately, he had reached a point where football no longer gave him the same drive. Unlike many players who hang on until their bodies break down, Sanders chose to step away on his own terms. The Lions, though, weren't thrilled. Just 2 years earlier, he'd signed a massive 6-year, $34.56 million deal with an $11 million signing bonus. When he retired, the team demanded $5.5 million back. Sanders fought it, but after months of back and forth, an arbitrator ruled in early 2000 that he had to return $1.83 million right away, with the rest spread over the final 3 years of his contract, if he stayed retired. But even though the relationship between Sanders and the Lions stayed strained for years, rumors of a comeback never seemed to die down. Every offseason brought whispers of a return, but Sanders repeatedly shut them down. The doubts finally ended in 2004, when he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame at just 36 years old, making him the second youngest player ever honored. From there, the accolades kept coming: spots in the College Football Hall of Fame, the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame, and the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame. Over time, even his bond with Detroit healed, and by 2017, Sanders returned as a team ambassador. Away from the spotlight, he's lived a quiet and private life. Looking back, Sanders has never second-guessed his decision to retire. In fact, he's been clear in interviews that he doesn't regret walking away, even if it wasn't easy. Sure, he misses the game sometimes, but he's proud he had the clarity to step away on his own terms. What really wore him down were the roster changes in Detroit. The tight bonds he'd built with teammates started to unravel as familiar faces left, and the replacements just didn't measure up. Without that chemistry, his faith in the Lions' future faded. And while he never once thought about joining another team, he also couldn't see Detroit as a real Super Bowl contender anymore. When he reflected on his choice with his sons during a documentary, he explained that it wasn't only about losing, it was about no longer having the same fire to keep playing. Deep down, he knew the time had come. His body was healthy, his mind was clear, but his heart simply wasn't in it anymore. Sanders left the game with 10 unforgettable seasons in Detroit, finishing with a team record of 78 and 82 and only 5 winning years. Yet his departure revealed just how much he had carried the franchise. After he retired, the Lions' struggles only deepened, posting a 48-112 record over the next decade with just 1 winning season. At the time of his retirement, Sanders was closing in on Walter Payton's all-time rushing record, but the chase meant less to him than the reality he faced every season in Detroit. As he put it in later interviews, the numbers alone weren't enough to keep him in the game. Walking away at the peak of his powers was his final statement, and one he has never once looked back on with regret. But while Sanders left football on his own terms, life had another test waiting for him. For the first time, Hall of Fame running back and Detroit Lions legend Barry Sanders is opening up about the heart attack he suffered last summer. His story is now at the center of a new documentary set to premiere this weekend. The health scare happened over Father's Day weekend in 2023, when Sanders was 55 years old. At the time, he released only a short statement on social media, thanking doctors, nurses, and fans for their support. But he kept most of the details private until now. In the upcoming documentary, The Making of a Heart Attack, Sanders shares his full experience and what he's learned along the way. The moment it all began, Sanders was on a recruiting trip with his son Noah. He woke up one morning expecting a normal day on campus, but instead felt a burning in his chest that he assumed was just heartburn. Hoping rest would help, he left and drove home. But the sensation wouldn't go away. Eventually, he drove himself to the emergency room. At first, doctors didn't see anything unusual, but further testing revealed his cardiac enzyme levels were elevated, a sign of heart damage. That's when Sanders was told he had suffered a heart attack. It came as a shock. Even as a retired athlete who still worked out regularly, Sanders never imagined he was at risk. Like many former players, he was used to pushing through discomfort, which is why he dismissed the early warning signs. But this experience taught him how often heart attacks go unnoticed until it's too late. In the film, Sanders joins 4 other people, a teacher, an author, a father, and daughter, to share stories about heart health. The common theme among them is that none of them saw it coming. Together, they discuss the risks, the recovery, and the importance of recognizing warning signs before tragedy strikes. Sanders also highlights the role of cholesterol, especially LDL, known as bad cholesterol, as a key indicator of heart health. His own recovery has been both humbling and educational. Doctors advised him to make lifestyle changes, from taking medication to adjusting his diet and adopting simpler forms of exercise like walking. For Sanders, it was a new perspective on what it means to stay healthy. He admits that in the past, he dismissed walking as a workout, but now he sees it as a heart-healthy habit that can make all the difference. The experience has also turned him into an advocate for awareness. He stresses that heart disease is not always tied to poor habits. Sometimes it's hereditary, and the best step anyone can take is to have honest conversations with their doctor. Beyond the lessons in health, Sanders has also been moved by the outpouring of love from fans. The support, he says, made him realize just how deeply people cared about his well-being. Today, as a father of 4, he is focused on moving forward, using his platform to encourage others to take their health seriously. Through the documentary, Sanders hopes his story, along with the stories of others, will push people, athletes and non-athletes alike, to educate themselves, understand their risks, and take preventative steps. For him, surviving a heart attack was not just a wake-up call, but a second chance to live healthier, happier, and with a greater purpose.